Now, to one of our partners, National Geographic. No organization has done more to explore the world and tell us its stories over the past 125 years than the National Geographic Society. National Geographic explores the planet, captures its images, tells its stories, connects its scientists and its citizens and its explorers. If a picture tells 1,000 words, National Geographic has told 10,000 billion stories. I'm delighted now to introduce National Geographic's executive editor of the environment, one of the smartest and most thoughtful men on the subject, Dennis Dimick. Dennis.
Oh, thanks. Nice to see you. Thank you for being here. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. I just want to make sure the mic's on. So I'm here, first of all, I want to welcome all of you, and I want to welcome all of those college students who are connected to us from afar today, and I want to give a special shout to my fellow Oregonians who were out in Eugene this morning. I know that it's early, so thanks for being out. What I want to do is talk to you about stories. That's what we do at National Geographic, and what I need to do first is talk about my own story, which began here in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. This picture I took about 40 years ago, about 2 miles from the house where I grew up. And it was on this farm that was eventually about 80 acres where we raised purebred Suffolk sheep, pigs. I was in 4-H and FFA. And during college, where I earned the money to go to Oregon State University studying agriculture, baling hay. This land is now all covered by large houses. And during this time, I got interested in photography, and this picture was one of the very first ones published in the student newspaper. My younger brother with a Suffolk ewe and her lamb. And as my photographic career advanced, I moved into the derivative work of Grant Wood, American Gothic. This is one of a series of my parents. They and the farm are both gone, but you see that that is real corn, that is real barn, a real barn. And so that's precursor, that's prologue. And so in the early 90s, I joined the staff of the National Geographic magazine and have had a wonderful opportunity to engage in a series of large-scale projects on energy and climate. Fracking this last year, we published a special issue on freshwater in 2010, and in 2011 we published a year-long series on world population. All of these questions feeding into this question that we're speaking about today. And as sort of an early indicator of our interest in this question of how will we eat, what's at stake, we put on the cover of the magazine a story about, of all things, soil conservation. Not something that you read about in the media much in this country or around the world. And what's so fascinating is that the success of a civilization is determined by the soil that it inherits. Whether you have topsoil or none will in large measure determine your success as a society. The farmer with the deep soil in Kansas, the farmer with the rocky soil in Syria. Does it not tell us, indicate to us the nature of the headlines that we read in the world? So the question really that we're asking here, we ask this question, well, what shall we have for dinner? For those of us who can choose, that's wonderful. But for many, the question is, will there even be dinner? And that, I think, is, we have two challenges here. How can we take the people who are able to ask the question, what shall we have for dinner, to be able to help meet this other challenge for those who are not necessarily going to have that choice? How can we help catalyze a better future for all? And that's really the story behind our own series that we are going to start next May. Our Food Future, Feeding a Hungry Planet, a series of stories, online, digital expressions, interactivity, community building that will run from May through December. The world's largest enterprise. Since the beginning of humankind, we have been cultivating the land both locally and for global markets here in Kansas to grow the crops that make the difference between life and death. But still, many of us are unable to get enough. And today, 1 billion people malnourished. 1 in 7. 1 in 7 families in this country on food aid. Here, a young girl in a country where the soil and the water conditions perhaps indicate the struggle for food. But is it right that here in America, in the heart of our own food belt, that people are unable to get enough to eat healthily? This will be one of the stories that we address in our series next year. We've been here before. This, an experiment station in Mexico, is where the Green Revolution began. The work that we hybridized wheat in combination. Dr. Norman Borlaug, as we know, was a catalyst, very important in making this happen to stave off starvation decades ago. And now we're in the midst of a situation where we ask, can there be a new Green Revolution? And what form will that take? So I need to take a step back and talk a bit about how the food system fits into the overall world system. We live in a different world today than the one that Dr. Borlaug worked in. In 1900, there were 1.6 billion of us. In 2000, 100 years later, there were 6.1 billion of us. 13 years later, 7.1. And latest projections from Population Research Bureau show about 9.7. Who knows where it's going to go, depending upon things like climate, water, all of the things that are uncertainties if you're a farmer and you don't know whether or not you'll be able to harvest your crop. But we do know this, that by mid-century, there will be more people living in cities than are alive on the planet today. So let's talk about the food system, and I'm speaking specifically, I know many of you know this, but I want to speak to the college students and the young people to help think about how this fits into the Earth system. In the larger, it's drawing the big circle. An old friend, Wes Jackson of the Land Institute, has said that you need to draw the circle of consideration big enough to include causation. So we're going to talk about causation, and we're going to talk about circles. This circle, the one where we live, it's been in an intimate relationship with this circle, the sun, for billions of years. And the relationship that is the key to all of our lives is this one, photosynthesis. The capturing of solar energy to grow plants that are the sustenance for humankind, though not this tree, but the grasses that we rely upon, the cereal grains. It is the key equation. It allows agriculture to survive. It allows us as civilizations to keep going. And when you look at this idea of bottled sunshine, this is the key equation, photosynthesis, that keeps us all going. But it also is the same thing that underpins our modern world, and it is little talked about, the fossil sunlight genie. This is coal burning in Wyoming. All that is the ancient carcasses of 400 million year old plants and animals that we dig up and light on fire. That's all it is. And that's what we do to keep the modern world going, whether it's coal, oil, or gas. Here, a mountaintop removal mine in West Virginia, we flatten hundreds of mountains to get at the energy that we need, that we want, so that I, for example, can stand here before you today under these lights and tell you the story. We burn it for electricity. Now coal is about a third of US power generation to keep the circus going. Also, oil, the underpinning, a huge underpinning of agriculture. These are boreal forests in Alberta that are being converted to oil sands, tar sands. It's one of the largest sources of oil in the United States today. This is what's happening in our quest for energy. John Holdren has said most of the environmental damage on the planet today has come from our quest for and use of energy. But we need to keep the wheels turning, not only for transportation, but for agriculture. It is an integral part of the world that creates the food that we depend upon. Then there's natural gas, and this is the one thing that people have no knowledge that there's a key connection with agriculture. And it works like this. It's been the underpinning of an explosion in world food productivity. 100 years ago, two Germans, Haber and Bosch, invented a process that allowed us to capture nitrogen from the atmosphere and create plant food. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. The Canadian scientist Vaclav Smil has said that 40 to 50% of us are alive on the planet today because of this one invention. It underpins modern agricultural productivity. This is a plant in Africa. So when you take a look at the role of fossil energy, it is so critical to the success of feeding the planet today. It has allowed mechanized farming, the creation of pesticides to keep vermin under control. It has underpinned things like pumps and irrigation, the mining of aquifers, and it's allowed the deserts to bloom. And we're richer for it. We are all richer for it. We've been able to build beautiful cities, highways, suburbia. All of these things rely, including our food, on this. And now even this picture taken by George Steinmetz just only 3 or 4 days ago in China. And this underpins some of the challenges we face. We're putting housing on our best farmland. So we consume more. Here, for example, this picture, these people, everything in this house that you see on the lawn comes from oil. But it also affects our own agricultural economy because we're rich and we consume more. We can take some of the most fertile farmland in the world to grow crops that are used to do things like feed livestock, cars, and to create sugar. The harvest is not necessarily going to people. These are soybeans that are getting on a boat and they're going to China to feed livestock. One of the questions that we must face globally is how much of this can we sustain? So there is a price to plenty. There is. And we have to acknowledge that, all of us, in the land, the water, the biodiversity, and the climate that all of these things are affected. We're cutting down forests to expand. Traditionally, we've cut down forests to expand agricultural production. So we turn biodiverse communities into monoculture communities. We have annual crops that are not on the land all the year. We have to struggle to keep soil in place. We have nutrient excess from putting too much fertilizer on land sometimes. This is in the Klamath Basin. This is the cause of things like dead zones. We mine aquifers, we drain rivers to make sure that the land that we are growing our crops for produce. But at the end, sometimes there isn't much left when the rivers go to the sea, like the Yellow River. But here, rising temperatures, the question, this is the only thing I'll say to you really about climate, and what you see here is, watch the map. And what you see here is a variation in global temperatures from the last 60 years. And what you see here is that there are regions of this planet that are warming up. As far as farming goes, that's a big issue because it changes the envelope in which we try to grow our crops and the behavior of the precipitation that we rely on to come reliably. So how to solve the dilemma? These are the kinds of issues we're going to address in our own series, how we're going to discuss today during this session. Obviously, we need to grow more food. We know that. Whether it's locally or it's for the global market, that's a given. But the question also is, how can we do it without cutting down the forest that we need to absorb the carbon from the atmosphere? How do we do that? How can we improve the productivity of the landscapes that we're on? How can we maybe rethink how we go about growing food? Maybe we think about putting food production in different places than we have traditionally thought about. City farming, urban agriculture, all of these things. We just can't keep expanding our footprint. Obviously, we need to improve yields, and the idea of supporting agricultural research and using all the tools available to help the farmers who need to eat is so important, because they are our future. We also need to think about what kind of diets that we have. How long can we afford to have a heavily meat-based diet? That's a question that I think is a useful question to ask. The answers are not easy. Western civilization loves a meat diet. We need to reduce food waste. The question of how can we reduce the throwing away of food in this culture? How can we improve on the production side across the world, improve infrastructure, transportation, refrigeration, so that farmers can harvest the crops and store and market the crops that they need? A couple of other things that we're going to address in our own series is the role of aquaculture. We have farmed the land for 10,000 years. The question now is there what potential for farming the sea as a way to generate protein for us? That will be one part of our series. And another thing, I think we need to take a look at the role of climate. And what we're doing in that regard is we're looking at the historical significance of drought and what civilizations have learned from that, what we can learn as we ourselves try to adapt to the changing envelope of climate in the world. So I wrap up here with some portraits of farmers. They are the ones who make the difference. Jim Richardson, who photographed the story on soils, I've worked with him on many projects before, is right now traveling the world meeting farmers. What we want to do in our series is help people understand and come to meet the people who grow our food. He's been to Peru. He's traveled in regions of the United States. We want people to connect to the people who are doing the work to bring the food to us. This woman he met at the Madison, Wisconsin farmers market, the largest farmers market in the United States. Bali, he was in Bali just last week, rice farmers. And he's still traveling. Today he is, I believe, in Mali. He was last weekend in Bangladesh, coming to meet, to me, putting faces to the people who make a difference, who put the food on their table, who put food on our tables. To me, it's trying to help connect people to the people who work on the landscape. In Ukraine, potato farmers, dairy farmers. Selections of all this will appear in our May issue. We'll have others of these online. These are the kinds of things that we're trying to do, not only to set the table in large measure of the challenge and opportunity, but also to make it personal so that people can understand that it is people who are there. And if there were one thing I would close with is to say, amongst all the things that we're talking about, perhaps this one is perhaps one of the more intriguing ones. Maybe we just need to grow more farmers, too. So that's a summary of the issues that have been going around in my mind now for about 40 years and what we're thinking about for doing next year. And that series will start in May of 2014. And I would like to close now. These are the social media. This is the Twitter and Instagram handles, as we're all adept at now in the modern era. But the reason I bring this up is because Frank has been talking with us, and what we want to do is to invite about a half a dozen students to the National Geographic to have further conversations about this, because we feel it's so important to engage the next generation. I have 2 daughters myself who are college age. They have already said they're intensely interested in these issues. I have no idea how they got interested in them. I'll let you decide. But this idea that we need to inoculate the next generation, provide them opportunities and a way to express themselves and to become engaged, I'm deeply committed to. And so we'll announce the details of how this can happen. And thank you all for the opportunity to be here today.